Welcome all. My name is Alfred. At work, I work for ACT as a communication and outreach officer. Today, we are having AI4D knowledge synthesis, which will be focusing on agriculture and gender, and mostly on. We are going to be talking about inclusion, a conversation on inclusion and exclusion. So just to give you a brief background about the scenario in Africa, as you may be aware, 14% of about 45% of people in Africa are involved in agriculture, and 51% of them being women. Most of Africa's agriculture is rural-based and it's mainly subsistence. Most of the burden of agriculture is borne by women, and we realize that there's certain groups that are really kind of marginalized and do not participate fully and do not benefit fully from the benefits of agriculture. We are talking about women, we're talking about the youth, and those maybe who never went to school very well. So we're going to delve deeper into a conversation whereby we're going to discuss some of the drivers. What are some of these drivers that lead to exclusion? When we talk about women, you realize that most of them are really faced, do not have enough resources and education and even access to markets. These are some of the things that make them not really fully get involved or benefit fully from agriculture. We are also looking at the youth. A bigger proportion of the continent's population are the youth, and then encounter various challenges, including unemployment, education, and training. We are also looking at people living with disabilities in Africa, some of whom are also excluded from agriculture, mainly based on attitudes and norms that are embedded in African society. So today we are going to delve deeper into the underlying drivers of exclusion, mainly focusing on the youth, women, and people with disabilities. So we are going to focus on three key questions. So the main question that we're asking ourselves today is, what are the drivers of inclusion and exclusion in Africa? That's the key question that we are discussing today. And at this point, I'm going to bring on board, I'm going to give an opportunity to Dr. Mbaya, who heads the Gender, Youth and Inclusive Development Program at ACT, who is going to give us some ideas or delve in deeper into what really drives inclusion and what really drives exclusion in Africa's agriculture. Dr. Mbaya, you can take the floor.
Hello, good evening, good morning, wherever you're listening to us from. My name is Caroline Mbaya, and I'm currently the head of the Gender, Youth and Inclusive Development Program at African Center for Technology Studies. And I'm really happy to be here in this forum today to discuss about exclusion and inclusion in the agricultural value chains. I think there's a lot of misconception when people talk about the excluded persons, but I'm glad that Alfred delved deeper into the kind of people who might be excluded. It's not just the women. We do have people from different age groups. We have persons who are differently abled. And so it's very important, first of all, to understand that when we're talking about exclusion, it's not just women who might be excluded. There are instances where men are also excluded in some societies or some in value chain. So when we look about exclusion, I'll categorize exclusion in three different broad groups. We look at economic exclusion, which touches on employment or unemployment, material deprivation. So for example, you have lack of amenities, of lack of financial services, inequality in terms of asset or opportunity. So the economic exclusion again doesn't touch on one particular group. It could cut across, depending on your age, your social background, your family, your culture, your the political stability. And so economic exclusion could be driven by a number of things, which Dr. Ojenge and I will discuss later on. So another type of exclusion is exclusion from social services. And this is a very big type of exclusion because you have a group that is excluded from health services, you have a group that is excluded from education, and education is a really big form of exclusion because it opens the doors to other things. It's in a lot of studies, it has been seen to be an indicator of financial stability, of well-being, of employment. So exclusion from these social services such as health and education is a big aspect to that that can affect the viability of somebody's well-being. Then we have exclusion from participation, from civic or social life, and we see the groups that are excluded from civic participation in terms of voting or in terms of being allowed to be in leadership positions or to join board membership. And then there's also exclusion from, having social capital. Social capital, we talk about networks, and it has been seen that women maybe might have less robust networks, and which then provide business opportunities or employment opportunities. So that form of exclusion again leads to less economic benefits or marginalization. Okay. There's four types of exclusion now, especially now in the digital era, which I'd like Dr. Ojenge to speak about, which is technological exclusion. So let me invite my colleague to talk about that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Carol, for inviting me. I'm Winston Ojenge. I'm a senior research fellow at the African Center for Technology Studies based in Nairobi, Kenya. I also head the Digital Economy Program, and it's exciting to be part of this conversation. I know I'll speak more, but in response to Caroline's request, today technology is heavily leaning towards the digital. The digital components and elements are optimizing access and processing of data and information within technology, and therefore digital illiteracy is one extremely powerful form of exclusion. Farming that takes place mostly in the rural, and then is a victim of digital illiteracy. There's also linguistic illiteracy. The digital equipment themselves work within human languages, and most of them are designed in the more formal languages. Yet, a lot of the farming community in the rural are vernacular, heavily monolingual, and therefore linguistic illiteracy is one form of exclusion from this equipment. There's also device inaccessibility. They may want to access information, data, awareness through digital technology, but would they be able to afford the devices? And another is networks. Networks invading the entire country, and we've seen that rural areas sometimes are excluded from the information networks. Then one, probably last one, is energy supply. Yes, solar technology is beginning to take effect. It's beginning to be invasive in all corners of Africa, but it's still not adequate. And a lot of people are still cut out from energy that would drive the digital technologies that we're talking about. Thank you. Back to you, Caroline.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ojenge. Yes, so, this form of exclusion is, we can find that it could either come out of the society, or either because of culture, or because of agency, the fact that the government has traditionally used one form of persons, in its activities. It could come out of traditional roles, maybe the politics of the country or the legal frameworks. So it's very important to understand the types of exclusion, and so that even as we're looking at who are the categories that are included and who is excluded, we'll be able to have a robust discussion then about how to remedy this situation, how to make sure that in agriculture, especially, that the excluded persons who consist of actually the bulk of the workforce are included in the change and in the betterment of agricultural value chains. I think I'll send the question back again to our colleague Alfred.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mbaya and Dr. Ojenge. I think you've delved into the topic and explained some of the drivers that bring about exclusion. But now I've mentioned about some of the groups that have been included, but now we want to go deeper into them, and I'm going to ask Dr. Mbaya to tell us who are these groups that are really excluded in Africa's agriculture. Can you maybe mention them and maybe say something about how they have been excluded?
Well, we do have quite a number of categories of excluded persons. We can talk about the people who are involved in agricultural systems. Who are these people? You find there's a lot of young people, a lot of women. Again, farming in Africa tends to be for the people who are not very financially well off. So you could say it could be for the poor people. Farming again tends to be for persons who have less formal education. So it could be that you'll find that more people who are involved in the agricultural value chains have lower education or skills. And then since farming happens in the remote areas of Kenya, you find that most of the people who do farming then will be in rural areas or in remote areas. We may not have a lot of persons who live with disability who may be involved in farming at a large extent, but indeed they should be able to have the opportunity to do farming, if this is the option. So when we look at the reason why maybe women and youth in particular are excluded, I mean, I look at two main reasons for the exclusion. It would be networks and education. When we look at the networks that are required to maybe to grow a business or to thrive in life, you see that networks are very important when you're looking for markets for your goods, when you're looking for cheap inputs for your farm, for your farming. You're also looking for advice about how to manage your farm or for pest resistance kind of crops. And women tend to be left out of the networks where there are these conversations, maybe because of traditional roles, or maybe because they don't occupy the spheres where the discussions about about where the importance of maybe crop rotation or good husbandry in those circles might be, maybe just excluded for certain persons, maybe not women or youth. And so we see that the fact that women's network, comprises of fellow women who may not have access to groups where they have this kind of information, leaves them, disadvantaged in terms of the kind of farming practices that they engage in. Again, this could be due to lack of access to education, because if you have a lower level of education, then you're not able to tap from the network. You're not able to learn from, you're not able to derive the maximum benefits from your circles. You're not able to pick a lot of information from the media or just maybe your social capital. So again, education and networks working hand in hand, because your education circles again are able to provide the proper networks. When you meet people in school, they're able to exchange ideas and offer networks in terms of opportunities for the market, opportunities for the betterment of your your produce. And so the lack of education, or the lower level of education amongst women in specific, then might disadvantage them in terms of being good farmers. All right, so maybe I can also talk about finance. The fact that finance again is a big aspect of exclusion, especially for the poor. That's another category that we've looked at, who are excluded and who tend to take up jobs which don't require a lot of input. So when the financial system is based on a lot of land ownership, a lot of collateral, and we find that people who are poor or traditionally marginalized, or women who have certain roles, or youth who have not yet maybe inherited land or had enough money to acquire land or collateral, then will be excluded from the financial sectors in terms of accessing capital to boost their earnings, or to even to acquire proper inputs for in agriculture. I think I can invite Dr. Ojenge to talk about some legal framework and politics. I think, Doc, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was wrestling with the microphone. Thank you very much, Caroline. Yes, politics and legal frameworks definitely are spaces that cut out people. I think the kind of representation on the political space would most likely demand that, or require that more women are active in representation, because then legislation where representation or a big part of the political machinations play are where laws are also made. And law reforms is a very powerful thing, especially when you talk about land reforms that Caroline has just spoken about. Most of them could be driven through laws. And when women are more involved in this process, and being more empathetic to the women folk who are practicing agriculture in the rural, then certainly we expect there would be faster reform. I think that's probably to the extent I can contribute there.
Thank you, Dr. Ojenge and Caroline. Maybe to build on what you've already discussed, we would help delve into what could be some of the manifestations or the socioeconomic effects of those who or rather, what would be the socioeconomic effect of marginalization, and how can we recognize the groups that have been marginalized with regard to agriculture. Maybe I'll continue with you, Dr. Ojenge, and then Carol will come.
Thank you, Alfred. For me, it's quite simple and straightforward. I would expect the effects, the manifestations are in observable effects. And the observable effect definitely would be deeper poverty for community. There would also be less access to education, because when there are no resources to commit children to an educational process, then definitely that becomes a vicious circle in even deeper poverty. It would of course be condemnation of future generations to poverty, because without access to education, what else do you expect? There would definitely be more crime as more youth are cut out of the economic space. There would be more conflict over natural resources. We know quite a large swaths of this continent are semi-arid, and there's always conflict over natural resources such as water, grazing land, etc. There will definitely then be more political instability caused by some of these conflicts, and also caused by what you call unhealthy politics within an environment of extreme poverty. Thank you.
I'd also like to add to what Dr. Ojenge has spoken about and say, I mean, a big indicator really is, as you said, poverty. You find people are not able to access good healthcare. They have food poverty. You have unemployment. There's lack of housing or ownership. I mean, it's very clear to see an excluded group, because you find they're the ones who then fall into, who are vulnerable during the, any form of crisis or any form of instability in the economy. And so there are definite, indicators, of exclusion. If it's, persons with disability, you find that they're not able to access the normal services. They're not able to, to work in the farms. They're not able to benefit from the agricultural value chains. So there are definitely a lot of indicators, and especially in agriculture, which is, a bedrock of our community, whereby we find that the people who actually work on the farms, or who are the main people who are involved in the food systems, don't benefit from them economically. They still have food poverty, despite the fact that they're producers of food. And that kind of inclusion is important, to make sure that the people such as women and youth and the elderly persons who are involved in preparation of our food systems then benefit from those systems.
Thank you so much, Caroline and Dr. Ojenge. Now we are going to delve into one of the key components of this webinar, and now we're going to talk about what are the interventions, on what solutions can we put in place so that we can reverse or address some of the marginalizations that we see in agriculture, especially in Africa. So what can we do? What are the interventions that we can put in place to address some of this, the issues that arise from marginalization? I'll start with you, Dr. Mbaya, and then I'll go to Dr. Ojenge.
I think one of the main things that, especially in agriculture, is, to make sure that people are included, is to have equal access to finance, because in agriculture has a lot of cost of input, and it's very important to make sure that the people who are involved in our agricultural value chains have equal access to capital and financing. I think another thing is to make sure that people who take on a huge burden of unpaid work are able to benefit from, from the kind of work that they do in terms of making sure they have equal access to, to benefits from agriculture. You find a lot of women who might be working in the farms, also have multiple tasks at the home, and still earn very little money, when they go to the farms. It would be good for, as a remedy, for the future systems, to make sure that people who have a high burden of unpaid labor are able to have what do you call it? A good balance of work, in terms of being able to work when we can call it contract work, when make sure that they're able to work when, in balance with their, domestic roles. Because you find that the fact that they have, women have a high burden of work at home, it doesn't leave a lot of time for them to go to the farm. And when they do, that means that they earn very little money. And so it would be good if they were involved in more profitable value chains, such as trading, maybe processing, value addition, as opposed to just being at the bottom of the value chain, which just involves manual work. Over to you, Doc.
Okay, thank you. I know this usually is the hardest part, coming up with the solutions, and on top of what Caroline has just said, I would also like to create a conversation around this, because these solutions or interventions are not hard and fast. A lot of it is going to come from the wider crowd. Climate being one of the ravages of especially rural agriculture, we probably would want to go towards irrigation. I know sources of water is sometimes hard to come by, but there are many innovative ways of trapping runoffs during rains. Underground water we could explore. And another thing would be to have early alerts of climate events or weather events that could ravage agriculture. Artificial intelligence, one of the technologies we are currently employing in our AI Institute, would provide a perfect early alert to at least enable people to plan. Markets and in access to markets is also a very powerful exclusion driver. And I know that there are certain places in Africa where that are so remote geographically, and you can't get produce onto market fast enough. But I think what is happening in the East, especially in India and large parts of China, happens also in Europe now. These are huge swaths of space that are joined by rail, and rail happens to be very cheap transport. Maybe there could be more private partnership and public partnership efforts that would enable enhancement of more invasive network within the continent. Under education and information, without appearing to lean towards formal education, which of course is very powerful as an includer, but community innovation and co-creation through, for instance, demo farms or model farms. Within every community, you'd find a handful of people who've had exposure on modern techniques of farming that reserve or tend to economize resources. Then they could be actualizing this within model farms that then teach the rest of the community and transfers knowledge. It's also important to understand that there is a lot of power in indigenous knowledge. There are instances where farms have used manure away from fertilizer, have used biochar, which are easy to make right at home and have a power against fertilizer without condemning fertilizer. There are also integrated pest management methods. A lot of them are more indigenous. We could exploit them. And the beauty is it would happen most likely in local vernacular that will be able to reach everyone. Finance, which is a big excluder, you may also go towards cheap microfinance credit. But institutions like African Development Bank, I know, offer currently products that rural farmers are mostly not aware of. There are also foundations like MasterCard Foundation, Kenya Commercial Bank in Kenya, for instance, have a foundation. And communities need to be educated on how to access some of these resources in terms of finance. Politics, a big excluder. Yes, there would be need for political reforms, but this would be enhanced by minority representation. So women, youth need to activate and get more involved in the political space so that they are able to represent their interests better. Technology is a big excluder, but we're saying that how can we enable digital literacy? I know I talked about this a while back. But one thing that we can surely do is to find ways of enabling rural communities to access skills, digital skills. There are digital skills that don't demand so much formal education, and they're also cheap to impart. There are also been, I remember that there is a program that was very exciting, and right now it's enabling rural communities to access cheap solar-based devices like lamps, lighting lamps, and mobile phone charging stations through a program called M-Kopa. M-Kopa means copper, coming from Kiswahili word, means borrowing. So that innovative ways that vendors are accessing rural spaces by selling some of these technologies through credit. And this credit is so innovatively, driven, so that I, as a rural farmer, I can buy such a device and be paying it daily. But every few days, when I miss paying, it activates a control system within the device remotely, so that I'm not able to access use of it. But the moment I begin paying back, then I can use it, and I can pay over a period of even one whole year. So those are some innovative ways in which technology can be enabled within rural spaces. Networks. I know Google came up with a very innovative program called Google Whitespace, where it was taking internet last mile to rural communities through those televisions borderline bands, those bands that are between the main licensed channels that are then not used. And that is made to access networks. And then also 5G, fiber optics through public-private partnerships. Disability or living with disability is also one serious excluder, but I also feel that solutions that are coming out of developers of these technologies that are more indigenous should also focus on linguistic access or ability or functionalities or solutions that enable people living with disability to access some of these services. For instance, if it is someone who is visually impaired, then they would be able to activate a voice component different from mostly textual solutions that are common. And I believe that innovatively, the ways in which some of these interventions can then be activated. But like I said, it would be lovely to also hear what comes out of the audience about interventions. Thank you, Alfred.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alfred, maybe I can what Dr. Ojenge. I'm really happy to hear about those interventions, especially in the tech, because I think once women are able to be brought up to speed with technological advancements, then they'll be able to take advantage of a lot of solutions that are being offered, especially by very innovative entrepreneurs who have found maybe ways to monitor crop disease, have found a way to increase levels of harvest, are able to predict weather patterns. So there's a lot of things that technological exclusion actually limits the people who are working on the farms from accessing or from bettering their produce. Obviously, it's very important to include agency. We know that a lot of policymakers, determine who gets excluded instead of just focusing on the high educated or urban settlers. It'd be very important to drive agency towards the more rural and excluded persons, to involve them in decision making. I think innovation is also a way of bridging exclusion. And as I've mentioned, there's a lot of people now who are using innovative ways to access farming. I think innovation before was in the urban spaces, but we're very fortunate that right now we have a lot of African innovators who are looking at taking innovation to to the farms, to the rural areas. I think innovation is definitely one of the key aspects that minimizes exclusion. When you look at an innovation like M-Pesa, for example, M-Pesa has been able to incorporate people even who have very little literacy. If you look at grandmothers in the village, they understand when money has been sent to them by their grandchildren. So innovation is one of the ways we can reduce exclusion, and especially amongst people who are marginally being excluded, for a long time. I also feel that dialogue is a key way of ensuring that people are not excluded. You find that if you're looking at culture, there's a lot of things, a lot of people who are excluded from being part of conversations. Maybe women are not allowed to be out in the evenings to sit down in the barazas or in public spaces to give their contribution. I think having dialogue or emphasizing the need to have everybody in the circles of dialogue is very important to make sure that everybody represents their own problem and challenges, so that when the innovations which are being developed and they take everybody's feedback in mind. All right, thank you, and over to you, Alfred.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mbaya and Dr. Ojenge. One of the key issues that I also think drive exclusion is one is the unpaid labor, and also the fact that Africa's agriculture is characterized by what I can call subsistence agriculture, where women mostly the one who are custodian of the crops that are used for subsistence, but the cash crop belong to the men. I think that's also a driver. The other thing I'm also thinking about is climate change. So I would like you, Dr. Mbaya, to kind of tell the audience what do you think would be a solution to the endemic problem of unpaid labor, especially in Africa, especially regarding the fact that most of the women who are involved in subsistence agriculture mostly do unpaid labor, as opposed to men who mostly are involved in cash crops and of course get paid, and of course they own land. So I would like to get your views around this, and also touch a bit on how climate change, how it affects this groups and how that can be addressed. And maybe Dr. Ojenge, as Caroline explains that, maybe you can also chip in after she's done that. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, you've actually brought a very important issue about unpaid labor, or what we call unpaid work, in terms of home care. So unpaid labor, we might be, it's not necessarily what we call, if you go to the industry, but unpaid work is when you take on a burden of care, maybe at home or for your parents or for your community. Sometimes it might not just be maybe children or the family. You find that the women are more likely to take on work even in the community in terms of, church, or if there's a barrier, women will take the charge to make sure that the family is taken care of, or for the cooking, and this definitely does affect their ability or their way they balance their work in agriculture. I wish we had a solution to that. I think we're still trying to see how that problem can be solved, or how women can be able to monetize their service or their input in society. Unfortunately, the culture and the norms dictate that the women should be able to volunteer their services. I'll be really keen to hear from our participants today, how they feel that they can we can contribute to making sure that women are compensated adequately for the home care or for the community care that they take on. I mean that I'll pose that to a lot of people. But I mean, at this point, I don't believe that it's something that has been resolved, or rather something that any community has shifted. That both men and women are able to take on equal care work. So I think that's it's still an open debate. I think the most important thing is to make sure that women have access to more profitable positions in the value chain. As I said, being involved at the manual labor, where you take on a lot of unmechanized work, then makes you really tired and gives you very little money. If women have access to more networks, or they have access to a little more education, or are able to move up in the value chains for agriculture, for example, if they control the markets, as they do in some parts of West Africa, where the women actually control not just the producing but also the market. When they do that, then they're able to have a more profitable contribution in the agricultural value chain, as opposed to just being the producers of the foodstuffs and not the beneficiaries. And yes, climate change has actually changed how we do agriculture now, because the burden of getting water or of failed crops still heavily falls on the woman who has to till the land. And so I think one of the main solutions, as opposed to making women recipients of tokens, or making sure that, or just having programs that make women out to be victims, it would be good to involve the women in the program or in the civic participation, to understand how best would be, the best way to move forward in terms of the climate smart agriculture. What kind of equipment do they need? Do they need finance so that they can access the drip irrigation? Do they need any knowledge? It's very important to involve the women, as opposed to giving them tokens or looking at them as victims. It's very important to involve them in making tangible changes or recommendations towards their own sustainability in agriculture. Dr. Ojenge, would you like to support me on that?
Certainly, anytime, Caroline. And I would start by looking at the tragedy of unpaid labor for women. There's an interesting topic, a topic that has always interested me. There's a certain pattern I've seen that where a man is educated and becomes a professor, it's very easy when the woman is left behind down there for the children to be fairly comparatively low achieving to their father. Where women have risen and got educated highly, it heavily influences children. Women seem to be custodians of values within family. They have a very powerful influence on children. When the woman has the ability to earn money, it also influences the children largely. And again, women are totally devoted to their children. All the money they ever make, they would save it. And you can see that happening in rural environments all the time. Women are always with the small basic funds, yet some of them aren't, because they reserve most of the money for the education of the children. Priorities, the different genders have different priorities. So it's important that there's money in the hands of women too. It's good for the family. About the climate change effect, it's ravaging, it's powerful. Of course, there's less yields because rains are becoming shorter. There are instances where the rains fall intensely for only 2 weeks, and most of the crops have a span of 3 months. One solution that comes to my mind is seed variety. There are seed varieties. Genetic engineering is now finally delivering seed varieties that are taking shorter and shorter to yield. Maybe we need to be looking there, rural agriculture. Also things like rain. Okay, when you talk about irrigation, to get out of rain-fed agriculture, irrigation seems to be a solution. Trouble now is again source of water. But source of fresh water is tough. But I know someone who's involved in a very small project that is using runoff from the roof. So someone who has a 20 by 20 house in the rural has enough roof runoff to be able to sustain a half-acre plot for the whole 2 months that an early yielding crop would take, because they would catch this water through the gutter and create a hole in the ground and put polythene cheaply so that this water is kept and reserved for irrigation. And it would be nice to then work out how much quantity daily each plant needs within that quarter acre, and be dropping that amount of water every day. If you can afford drip network, that would be powerful. But for those farmers that can't afford, then you'd simply do manual. The beauty is that you'd be able to guarantee a full harvest at the end of the 2 months. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ojenge and Dr. Mbaya. We have 9 minutes. I'm not sure whether we have questions from the audience relating to our discussion today.
Yeah, it would be
if
good
anyone
to hear
has
some
questions.
We have been listening to ourselves. It would be good to hear some participants ask questions or actually contribute. I would like to hear what people think about the unpaid labor burden and how we can solve that.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. I believe there could be some comments from the audience or some questions. If you maybe have some question, you can voice it. You can just mute your mic and voice it, or you can write it on the chat, and then I can read it out to the audience. Do you have any questions? Maybe you can raise your hand, or you can just unmute your mic and ask the question. Yeah, I can't see any hands.
Alfred, as we await the questions, could I chime in something closer to technology?
Okay, fine, Doctor.
So I had mentioned earlier that we are an AI institute that is trying to leverage artificial intelligence in order to optimize farm yields. And we do quite a lot of that, but there are a lot of things that we observe where AI is itself promoting the same exclusion that it's supposed to be mitigating in many ways. One is through data. Collection of data, very difficult, and most of these AI models are data hungry. Quality data is quality modeling of the crop, and therefore quality prediction of yield. And where yield seems to be suffering, then intervention in time within the farm, and also predicting events such as rainfall and planning for when they seem to be failing. But collection of data is always very difficult, and that is a very big player. It's a very big component within the exclusion space. You would want to be able to visit practically every rural environment and collect data, but most of the data is collected then remotely. It's only practical to collect them remotely in order that you don't traverse too much space. And sometimes the best data collection tools are mobile devices. But now there comes the issue of whether the rural folks are able to communicate and therefore respond to data requests using those mobile devices. Some of these applications, they need to respond by going vernacular, and even for the illiterate, getting out of text, but going voice. Those are challenges that solution developers need to wrestle with. Yes. Then there's algorithm. Yes. Okay. Alfred.
Thank you, Doc. There's a question on the chat. Someone would like to know about algorithmic bias in agricultural model. Algorithmic. It's quite algorithmic bias in agricultural models. Maybe Dr. Ojenge, you can handle that. Doctor, you are muted.
Sorry. Bias creeps into the predictive models in two ways: through data, which is not quality or not exhaustive enough, or collected poorly, sometimes because of the distances between, or the remoteness of the rural farms and the data centers. Then that also creeps into the mathematics of the algorithms, and that is algorithmic the bias. Usually this comes from development process of the algorithms. Like I said, they are mathematics. They're mathematical equations, very complex, that are able to pick the data and apply the data and keep on reorganizing its weighting system so that the output of the algorithm itself reflects the output of the data coming from practical environment. So in the process of tweaking these internal weighting systems, designers often induce biases. Those are called biases by design. They're deliberate biases that are supposed to enable precision of these predictive algorithms. So when data that has predominantly come from a certain section of the society or community away from one, for instance, if that data was collected predominantly from male farmers away from female farmers, then as they tweak the biases to increase accuracy, the biases tend to lean towards the features of the man. So that the moment you introduce the gender field, we have actually observed instances that show clearly that this is algorithmic bias. You find that you have a farmer and you want to be able to predict their yield, and you collected data such as, soil type, seed variety, type of fertilizer, quantity, date of planting, the rainfall on a daily basis, amount, instances, of infestations of pests, and disease, and then finally yield. So you want to be able to predict the yield of, say, farmer F, in order to enable whether they can access credit or not. If you activate the gender field and farmer F seems to be female, then you will probably have a lower yield than if you killed the gender field entirely. So if we knew it was farmer F, but the algorithm didn't know the gender of the farmer, would probably predict 20 bags per acre. But the moment you reactivate the gender field, then now you realize if that farmer is female, now the predicted yield has come down from 20 to 18 bags per acre. Why? The only data which has been different in these two instances is the gender data. All the other data, types of data, rainfall, etc., were constant. Therefore, that tells you that that algorithm is biased against gender. And those instances are numerous, and then it would be nice to have an intervention towards to keep retweaking the same design process biases to be able to accommodate them and weed out those gender biases.
Thank you, Dr. Ojenge and Dr. Mbaya. So we have run out of time. 1 hour is over. I would like to thank the panelists, Dr. Mbaya and Dr. Ojenge, and also the audience for the patience and also for joining to listen to us. I think the discussion has been apt. We need to really understand the drivers of exclusion so that we can develop appropriate solution to bridge the gap to actually empower the marginalized groups so that they can benefit, participate, and also benefit fully from agriculture. So thank you so much. I believe we can have another forum where we can take this discussion forward. But I think it has been illuminating, and I believe we've learned a lot from this, and from our individual areas. We can also try to support programs that try to reduce exclusion. So thank you so much, and may you have a good evening.
Okay, thank you. This has been a really wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfred.